Greetings, Field Guides fans. Bill Michaelek here, and I'm solo today, bringing you a special episode focusing on the blue iguana of the Cayman Islands. This endangered lizard is found nowhere else on the globe, save for the island of Grand Cayman in the Caribbean. And just 2 decades ago, it's likely that there were fewer than 25 animals remaining in the wild. This was a species that was functionally extinct, but thanks to the herculean efforts of a dedicated group of people, the blue iguana has been brought back from the brink, with over 1,000 iguanas now roaming the dry, rocky forests of Grand Cayman. In July of 2024, I traveled there and interviewed Fred Burton, the man many people credit as the main driver behind the effort to save this endemic species. He currently manages the Terrestrial Resources Unit for the Cayman Islands Department of the Environment, but he took time out to meet me at the Queen Elizabeth Botanic Park, where an ongoing captive breeding program raises iguanas for eventual release. We walked the trails looking for lizards, while Fred shared the iguana story and how it intertwined with his own life. Now, as you listen, remember that this botanic garden is open to the public, so you're going to hear the sounds of visitors around us. And the day was breezy, so we did have to deal with some wind noise and some mic noise, but you'll also get to hear the amazing diversity of tropical birds around us. Also, keep in mind that during our conversation, Fred will mention some of the other Cayman Islands. They consist of 3 islands. The largest is home to the blue iguana, and it's where this episode was recorded, Grand Cayman. But there are 2 smaller islands, Little Cayman and Cayman Brac, which Fred sometimes just refers to as the Brac. They're all found in the Western Caribbean, just south of Cuba. And now, let's head out on a balmy tropical afternoon for a hike with Fred as he shares the story of the Grand Cayman blue iguana. And you get to hear me make a rookie mistake with the mic. You'll see.
Hello and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Bill, and I'm not here with Steve and Daniel today. I am in the Caribbean on the Cayman Islands with my very special guest, Fred Burton. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Bill.
And folks, we just had a horribly embarrassing thing happen here. Fred and I have been talking actually for about a half an hour, and I looked down and I realized with horror that I forgot to hit record. So Fred is being a wonderful, good sport and agreeing to talk about everything that we just talked about again to nobody in particular besides the 2 of us. But we are here in the Queen Elizabeth Botanic Park, and we are looking for our target species, which we just came across. What is it, Fred?
That is a baby blue iguana.
And that is who we're looking for today. As I said in the intro, the Grand Cayman blue iguana. We have one on the trail right in front of us right now. So let's talk about, what are we looking at?
This animal would have hatched just last year. And this is actually one of the nice things to see here, because it used to be you'd walk around this botanic park, you wouldn't have no chance of ever seeing a blue iguana. Things have got a lot better since then, and what's actually happening now is the captive bred released adults that we put into the park here have been breeding now for a great number of years. And we've been managing the habitat for them, and they are really doing well here. They're doing so well that we can walk around these trails, we can see iguanas wandering around the place completely wild and natural, and we're starting to see these little babies hopping around. So this animal would have hatched right here in the park.
So we're seeing the fruits of the success of the program, right?
We are, and it's really beautiful to see.
And we'll get into the program and what it's all about as we walk along today. But let's describe for the audience what blue iguanas look like. You know, when they see one, what are they going to see?
Well, this is, as I say, a baby, so this one's like a foot long. They grow more like 5, even maybe sometimes rarely 6 foot long. They can be over 10 kilograms. They're basically giant lizards.
And they are the largest wild animal on the island,
The
right?
largest native land animal ever here. But we had crocodiles too.
Oh, okay.
And, I mean, we're walking actually past a place where we pulled out a lot of Cuban crocodile bones when we were developing the park. So the crocodiles would have been even bigger, but they weren't strictly terrestrial. They're a kind of a coastal type species and a wetland kind of species. But these guys live in the dry land, and they were the biggest thing. They don't have any natural predators when they're up to a certain size. This size, a native snake could still take that animal. But as soon as they get a bit bigger than that, the snake's like,
not worth messing with.
Couldn't get that one down.
And then cats and feral dogs too are a predator.
Well, that's thanks to us, because they were never native here. And that's actually a terrifying problem for these animals, because that is a popsicle to a feral cat. So we actually trap feral cats here in the Botanic Park and try and keep the place reasonably cat free. It's a hard thing to do because feral cats are everywhere on this island, and they're a significant density. So if you decide in a particular area you want to remove feral cats, you create a little population sink, and it keeps on filling from outside. So it's a never-ending process.
Sisyphus.
Yeah. The only way you can get past that is to put a fence around, and then a cat-proof fence, and that's a serious undertaking in its own right. And then the cats stay out. The iguanas would have to stay in, and then the iguanas are captive because this is the other thing that gets really complicated. An animal this size is fine. It can live in the park. Its range is a few hundred yards around here. We'll see it here many times. When they get up to being big animals, especially the big males, they roam for miles.
Oh, wow.
They're in the business of trying to monopolize as many female territories as they possibly can and try and keep every other male off the same thing, which is an unachievable thing. So they're all rocketing around the landscape in the breeding season, chasing each other, checking on this one, and literally they're going much bigger. This park is 65 acres. They're not staying inside the 65 acres. We have them released in the Salina Reserve, which is 600 odd acres, and they're definitely spending time outside that protected area. They're trying to recolonize some of their ancestral range in the east end of the island where there's no protection, and we're looking at this sort of landscape situation where how do we manage the threats, because all the threats that drove the iguana to the brink of extinction are still operating. Nothing's changed.
Those?
They are. I always joke that it's dogs, cats, and fast cars, but it's also habitat destruction on a massive scale. The human population here is expanding very, very rapidly, and the landscape is being literally taken over for our houses, our roads, our golf courses, our businesses.
That's one of the things I noticed when I was reading about you preparing for this episode, is I saw that a part of your efforts, which I thought was so important, was establishing preserves, safe places.
Yes, and actually that's much more important in some ways than this species conservation work. We being like this whole consortium of local and international people who are involved in this Blue Iguana program, we focused heavily on the Blue Iguana partly as a strategy to protect land. Because if you think about trying to persuade people to donate money to buy land, there's a few things that make it much easier. It's good if the land is cheap.
Not in Cayman Islands.
It's good if the land is something that everybody identifies with. Okay, so people identify particularly with rainforests. None here. Okay. We have dry forest systems. Dry forest systems are on the edge of what people are aware of. We know that there's huge loss of dry forest through the Caribbean, along the Atlantic coast of South America. It's a massive issue. Anybody who's paying attention will have heard of dry forests. But if I talk to you about xerophytic shrublands, your eyes are going to start to close.
Yep.
Right? Now your attention is going to go somewhere else. It's not sexy. All right? Dry shrubland, xerophytic shrubland. And this is what we're in right now. And actually it is. It's pretty kind of cool. It's got a huge plant diversity. Right now we're on the edge of a wetland, so you don't see it, but it's a rock garden. All this karst and these plants are rooted into the rocks. But it's really hard to move around in. The vegetation is all height that you are, and it's like there's vines and prickly things. And it's just difficult. So there's not a lot of awareness and not a lot of connection to that habitat, but there's connection to these animals.
That's people's way in.
These animals are surprisingly like people. They've got personalities. They make plans and carry them out. They're active in the day. They like to sunbathe. You look in their eyes and you can see there's something going on.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they're the easiest things to anthropomorphize.
Charismatic megafauna.
They're charismatic. They're not exactly mega, but
right.
they're mega for here. I hope we find a big one for you. Actually, it'll be exciting.
So the question that I wanted to start with, and I know we'll be repeating this, but how tired are you of talking about the blue iguana?
Well, The truth is, I'm never tired of talking about blue iguanas because they're actually intensely interesting. But what I got tired of is telling the story. How did I get involved in this? How did it start? All this, the backstory. And it's an interesting story, but I've told it a lot of times. So I got to the point that I thought, okay, I just need to write this down. So I did a book, and there it is. We called it the Little Blue Book.
Perfect.
It's a quick read that you can sort of buy and take on the plane, and you'll be finished by the time you get to Miami or wherever it is you fly to.
We'll point people in the direction of where they can find that book.
But yeah, I can still tell the story. Heck.
So how did you get started growing up? Were you a kid that was into nature?
Big time, yeah. I've always been fascinated by natural things, and I don't know where it comes from. But I mean, as a kid, I collected insects. I spent a lot of my very early childhood in the Middle East in Kuwait, and I just have this memory of stuff there that was really exciting. We had monitor lizards. You'd be driving down this desert road, and this huge, great big lizard would dive down a hole, and you think, what was that? and we had like these big birds that would turn up in the backyard, a hoopoe or whatever it might be. And but it was always like, where do these animals find food and so on? Here's another iguana. See, this one's got beads on it.
Ah, okay.
So this is one of the ways we identify.
Ooh, so he's opening his mouth real wide like that.
Yeah.
Taking a yawn.
Yeah, again, we can identify with that, can't you? Oh, yeah, I just got out of bed. Oh, where's the sun? I need to warm up a bit here.
So the beads, he has beads on his crest, you mentioned.
Yeah, so if you look at this carefully, you'll see the beads are symmetrical on both sides. So that's yellow, no, it's white, yellow, white.
Folks, we're just a few feet away from this guy laying on the side of the trail. A girl, I should say, right?
Yeah, this is a female,
smaller.
a young female.
Those toes, they're so long.
Yeah, and she won't let you do it, but if you were to get hold of one of those toes, you know how ours bend down towards our palms? The iguana's back legs, they bend sideways towards their pinky.
Why?
Because if you think about what they use these for, they use them partly for digging, because they dig to lay eggs. So if you want to push back with your feet, you don't want them to bend against the push, but when you bring them back, you want no resistance.
Right.
But
I think of snapping turtles in my neck of the woods, watching them bury eggs.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But also, they're like passive hooks, because these guys do climb trees. They climb trees to get berries and food and stuff that might
Most
be
of their
up
time's
there.
on the ground, but they do go into trees,
Yeah,
right?
especially the smaller ones spend more time up in the trees. The consequences of falling out of a tree get more serious as you get larger.
Right.
So these small ones are fine, and they'll hang from one of those toes, literally. They're like a passive hook. There's no energy involved in that. It's cool. And they'll fall and just like snag whatever it is, and it's okay.
So I got distracted there. You were talking about the beads for visual identification, so you don't have to catch them again.
Yeah. So I can look at those beads and look up a database, and I can tell you exactly who she is, when she was born, who the parents were, who the grandparents were, the whole family tree.
So our audience will be familiar with that. We've done some episodes on bird banding, which one of my co-hosts and I, we do in Western New York. So same deal. We just used silver bands.
Yeah.
We aren't quite high enough on the ladder to be into colored bands yet, but I know some researchers who are. So
yeah, it'll get there.
Yeah.
So this animal has a microchip under her skin. So we could, if the beads disappear, we could always scan for the microchip. And the other thing we do is we take photographs of the side of the head, left and right, and the top of the head, because those enlarged scales, while they follow a standard pattern, there are details that are unique to every animal. One scale might be divided into two, one scale might be combined, one might be a really weird shape and misplaced somehow. They're completely different from animal to animal to animal to animal. So this animal's scales and the aberrations in it and her scale patterns will be with her for her entire life, from hatchling till the day she dies.
So very much like a fingerprint.
So it is a fingerprint, and if the push comes to shove and the chip has failed and the bead tag has gone, we can look through a database of 1,000 images and say,
you can figure out
that one.
like mugshots.
Yeah. We haven't got a software program to do that yet, but there's probably going to be a way. The way AI is moving in this day and age.
Right.
I would say
It won't be long.
It's not going to be long before we can do that automatically.
Now, I was watching a video online of you, and you were talking about a certain spot on the back of the head, and I think I can see it, where there's that light colored scale.
That's the pineal gland, we call it.
I'd
but
never
it
heard of
isn't
that.
actually a gland. It seems to be a little lens on the top of the head that's connected through to the pineal gland in the brain. So we don't know this because we can't dissect these animals and investigate and do physiological experiments on them because they're critically endangered species. We don't do those sorts of
Right.
things with these animals. Even the dead one, we can look at the anatomy, but we can't test it in any way. So we're speculating, but almost certainly that is a light sensor, and it's probably tracking day length, because day length tells you about season, and season tells you when is it going to rain, when is the soil going to be damp, when is the right time to breed
And lay eggs.
and lay eggs.
Okay.
Yeah. So they breed typically in March. They mate and they lay their eggs at the beginning of the summer when the rains start and the soil is just starting to get damp. But they're all out hopefully by October, when it rains so much that the eggs would float out of the nests if they were still there. So there's this ideal time, and they're synchronized to it. And my guess is that pineal gland there is a big part of how they know when.
And right now, folks, just so you know, we're here in late July of 2024. So right now is not breeding season, but if we were here in breeding season and we did see a male, they would be a lot bluer, right?
Well, this is the thing about blue, right? If you go around the West Indies and look at all these different rock iguanas, they've all got different colours, they've got different scale patterns. There's a lot of diversity, but the question I get more often than anything else is about colour, because this animal is not blue right now.
It's like a grayish green.
Yeah, and they say, well, why do you call it a blue iguana? It's not blue. Okay, but if you actually look at the dorsal scale, there's the beginning of the blue happening there. But this animal is dark, and she is dark because she's trying to absorb sunlight. It's been a cloudy morning, there's not a lot of sun, there's a lot of high trees around here. She's in a patch of sun, she wants to absorb the heat. Black absorbs solar radiation much more effectively. When she gets hot, she will get paler. But it isn't just about thermoregulation, it's about signalling. Because if you look around here at the environment, what colours do you see? You see grey, you see brown, you see green. There's a little bit of russet red on that tree there. There's some orange lichen here. There is no blue.
Ah, okay.
None. If you want blue, you have to look straight up into the sky. That's the only place you'll see blue here. So if you've got an iguana in there and that iguana is blazing blue, it's very, very conspicuous. And that's what they're using this colour for, I think. It seems to be, because the males will blaze blue when they're in breeding season. They're tromping around the place. Look at me, I'm in charge of the world. The females are much more interesting in the way they manage their colour, because they will be grey at this time of year. They don't want any annoying
Not interested.
harassment, because it's not that time of year. Get out of here, So they're grey. They want them not to be noticed. And when they're grey on a grey rock landscape and they're not moving, they're almost impossible to see. They're angular, fractal-looking creatures on an angular, fractal-looking landscape, and they just vanish. They're camouflaged. Come the beginning of the breeding season, the females go through this sort of staged thing. They start to get blue heads. And it's like, you can come on a little closer, but not too close. Get out of there. Sort of like this something nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
And as they get closer towards a period of receptiveness, which can be as short as like 3 days, it can be really, really narrow, they start to get bluer. And then when they mate, they're as blue as the male that's mating them. It's like this blue fest. Then she lays her eggs and she guards the nest. And when she guards the nest, she is blue. Angry blue. Like, all of you, stay away from here. It's pretty spectacular the way they colour up for that.
And then does she stay with the nest until they hatch, and then?
It varies. If there's no other iguanas around, she won't do that.
Okay.
She'll just leave. She'll go and find food as fast as she can, because the females, when they've laid all these eggs, they look like they've been wrung through a wringer. They have lost all of their body cavity volume. They look thin, emaciated, because they can't even feed for the last sort of month or so of their reproductive cycle, because these eggs are the size of goose eggs.
Oh my God!
And these animals cram as many as they can inside, you know. So when they lay them, there's nothing left.
How many eggs?
It all depends on the size of the animal. I mean,
Okay.
the first time they ever do it, it'll be one egg or two eggs. But then the biggest I think we've ever had was like 24, something like that.
That poor mother. Oh my God.
So they desperately need food when this is all over, and they do. They go into this sort of like massive feeding frenzy, but only once they feel that the nest is safe.
Okay.
So if there's nobody else around, they'll just go and feed. But if there's other animals around, they will guard that nest site.
And then when the young hatch, they don't provide parental care?
Not at all, no.
Okay. All right. The young are on their own.
No, the nest guarding only usually goes on for a couple of weeks or something at most. Sometimes just a few days.
Okay. So we were talking about your childhood in the Middle East there, but eventually you ended up at Cambridge, right?
Yeah, so I went to university, did a degree in natural sciences, studied entomology, neurobiology, botany, all sorts of different things. And I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, and I didn't want to stay on. I had the option of staying on and doing a PhD, but I somehow didn't want to stay in academia. And I saw this advert for graduate research assistants in the Cayman Islands. And I didn't know where the Cayman Islands were, so I started asking around, and we ended up with like 3 of us gazing at this advert and saying, where is that? Where in the world is the Cayman Islands? And this is like 1970s, late 1970s. No internet, can't Google it, no smartphones, none of that stuff. So we went into the library and looked up the biggest atlas we could find and looked in the gazetteer, and it wasn't even listed. So I applied for the job to find out where the Cayman Islands were, and I got a job offer by telegram. I thought, well, heck. So I eventually found out where they were and
Made your way here.
I came here for a couple of years just for a lark.
That was the plan, right?
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you telling that story again, because I just love that story that you ending up here for decades rested on you seeing that advertisement. And I hear that so often in people in this field, how they ended up somewhere for the major part of their career, and that decision rested on some small thing.
Yeah,
I just find it fascinating.
We all have these branching points in life that are essentially random, and they have huge consequences.
Right.
I mean, it's an interesting mental exercise. If I hadn't looked at that, what would I end up doing?
Right.
And I have no idea. It would have been a completely different life.
And I know you'll probably deny it, but I would argue that if you didn't see that piece of paper, you wouldn't have ended up here, and the blue iguana might not be here. It might be extinct.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows if somebody else would have jumped in?
Right,
eh?
right. So
I would like to think that somebody would have seen the writing on the wall and done something. It needed to happen.
sure, we could hope.
Yeah.
So when you came here, it wasn't to study blue iguanas. You came here from Cambridge to study mosquitoes, right?
Yeah, I came to work at the Mosquito Research and Control Unit, which was a government agency run by a remarkable man by the name of Marco Giglioli. His father eradicated malaria from Guyana years before,
Wow.
and there was a statue to his honour in Georgetown, Guyana. That's all gone to shit now. The statue isn't even there anymore, and malaria is back. But I mean, in his time, he was a famous man. So his son was here doing mosquito control and running the MRCU, a bit like a little military operation. We were all dressed in khaki, and it was a tightly run ship. He led that for a long time. He eventually died of leukemia. And I migrated across. I was acting director there for a period of time, but I migrated across to our local National Trust, which is an environmental NGO also involved in historic preservation. So I ran their environmental programs for a decade, and it was during that period of time that I started to get really serious about the blue iguanas. But it was difficult because, I was working very much on setting up protected areas, mapping habitats and learning about the plant communities here. And I was only able to give maybe less than 10% of my time to the blue iguana stuff. And it was becoming really obvious that wasn't enough.
Oh, we got a big one crossing the trail.
Hello. Now we're talking. So this is an adult male. So his head is blue. That's that classic gene blue colour that gives these animals their name. They have red eyes.
Wow. What are those large sacs like behind his chin, or under his cheeks there?
That's muscle.
Wow.
That's jaw closure muscle.
So you don't want to get bitten by
You don't want to get bitten by one of these guys. They literally could they could go through the bone. They could sever your digit. But they're strong like that because they do fight. The males compete very actively for female territories. And usually it's a non-contact fight. They do a lot of head bobbing and other
bluffing.
types of and a lot of bluffing, but it's really about body size. I'm bigger than you, you just leave. And if you don't, I'm going to chase you, and you can stand up there and look frightening, but I'm chasing you now, and you turn and run, right? That's the way it typically goes, but then you get a situation where two evenly matched males are after the same territory, and they will circle each other for a while, and it can turn into not just one fight, but it can turn into a war. And we documented this in the Botanic Park here. It was an amazing thing. We had a film person here doing it, and we had the animal we called Forest was in charge of all the southern part of the Botanic Park. But then there was another animal who decided he wanted to take that over, and it turned into this thing. They fought here and it was an impasse, and then they fought here and it was an impasse, and gradually the fight progressed through the territory, and in the end Forest got chased out of the place. There was a lot of blood, a lot of fighting. They grab each other by the neck, they throw, they smack each other with their tails. It's vicious.
Wow.
And that's what that jaw closure muscle is all about, because the winning move is to clamp those jaws over the other guy's neck, and at that point it's all over.
That's all.
They don't usually kill each other, but there's brutal injuries sometimes.
Wow. It's got to be tough when you're trying to save them and numbers are low. But does that usually only happen when density is higher?
This is what starts to happen when density rises. Okay. Yeah.
Wait, so it's almost a good thing when that happens.
Yeah, I mean it's completely natural. So I mean there's no way that this is in some sense a bad thing. We can't put human values on the ways that animals behave. We shouldn't. That particular event was bad from a genetic point of view, because what happens is the animal that took over was brother to all of the females that were down there.
Oh no.
So we had to intervene. The inbreeding would not be a good thing.
Right.
So we actually caught that animal and put him in captivity for a while, and then let him go somewhere else.
So that leads me to questions, that I had about the program. Let's talk about the program, because you said that you were spending some time on it, but you realized it wasn't going to be enough. And what year was that around?
So this was coming up to 2000.
Okay. And am I remembering it correctly that at that time only about 10 or 20 animals were left on the island?
That was 2002. So what happened in 2001, I think it was, we managed to get the iguana specialist group to actually meet here in Grand Cayman in the visitor centre here at the Botanic Park. So we had all of the rock iguana experts from all around the world here. We had people from as far afield as Australia.
Wow.
Galapagos. We had all kinds of people here. So really a meeting of minds about what needs to be done about this animal. And we hatched an ambitious strategic plan, and we said we're going to try and restore a population of at least 1,000 genetically diverse iguanas into protected areas, and this is how we're going to do it. And everybody had the sense that we were just planning the impossible, right? But nothing less than that would save the species. So we were all saying, okay. So we were like starting to get down to the details. This needs to happen. Who's going to do this? What's it going to cost? And we went through this whole thing and created this document. And then this old guy from Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust in the UK, he wasn't so old then actually, Quentin Bloxon, he slapped me on the back and said, "Fred, have you looked at this? You realise how many times your name comes up in this document?"
Oh, who's going to be doing this?
Yeah, so at that point I basically resigned my job with the National Trust and began setting up what we called the Blue Iguana Recovery Programme.
So was this an independent effort at first?
Well, it was a partnership. There's no way that a completely independent NGO would have worked in Cayman back then. It might be moving more to realistic possibilities now, but anyway, back then it needed to be a partnership, and it's been a partnership ever since. So the National Trust, the Department of Environment, and various partners, international partners with the Iguana Specialist Group, were the key people who were on this sort of partnership for this program. I ran it as a volunteer. I didn't take any pay because there was no money, and ran it for a decade. And we got all of this, like this help from all corners of the world. So it was inspiring and exciting, because I mean we had San Diego Zoo and Tandora Grant committed to helping us all with what we call the stud book, figuring out who needs to breed with who to make sure we don't get inbreeding. How do we get enough different founder lines that we can capture the genetic diversity of the original population as much as we can?
Because that was my question. If you're down to, less than 20 individuals, that's functionally extinct.
They were functionally extinct. So this is what happened after that specialist group meeting. One of the first things in the plan was we need to get out there and assess what the wild population is, because the last time I did that we figured there were about a couple of hundred of them out there.
And when was that?
That was in the time that I was working with the National Trust, so that would have been in the 90s.
So in just 10 years they went from a couple of hundred to...
That's what we found.
Wow.
And it was like this gut punch. So we went out there to all the places we used to see iguanas, and they weren't there. And it's like, what happened here? And Quentin came out again to help us, and he nearly died. He got lost in the forest. I thought we were going to lose him for sure.
I was going to say, doing population estimates out here must not be very easy.
There was nothing easy about it. Joe Wasilewski came out here. Alberto Hamarillo came out here from the Galapagos. We were like going into all these back ends of beyonds in the bush, going to all of the places that we had or thought we could potentially see iguanas,
and not finding them.
And we were not finding them. We were not finding them. We were not finding them. When we were all said and done, we figured there were between 10 and 25 iguanas left in the wild, period. And most of them were on their own. They were just like the solitary animal living. And the more we watched, the more we realised there was nobody else there.
They were just waiting to die out, basically.
They're waiting to die. There was very little evidence of breeding. There was only one place we saw any sign of breeding going on. I hear a baby parrot. You hear that?
I do.
Let's go and see where that is.
Is this the Cuban parrot?
This is the Cayman parrot.
Ah. That's the call right there?
Yep. Well, that's a baby begging for food, but I can't see it yet.
Is there? I see two on a branch right up there. But there's three. You see it right up there?
Yeah. Oh, you see them feeding?
I do.
Yeah.
Oh, folks, we have a parent parrot feeding. Are there two babies up there?
There's two babies and two adults. And, it must be mom and daddy and two babies.
That was on my list to see while I was here. So thank you for that.
Cool.
So We don't have to put this in, but so the Cayman parrot and the Cuban parrot are not the same thing?
They're not.
Okay.
Well, they are and they're not. We're back to evolution again,
Okay.
aren't we? So the Cuban parrot is Amazona leucocephala,
Okay.
which stands for white head. At the moment, taxonomically, this is considered a subspecies, Amazona leucocephala caymanensis, and on the brack, another subspecies, Amazona leucocephala hesterna. I would lay odds that this is like the blue iguana situation. It just needs the work done. They're going to be different species.
He was
They
waiting for
speak
you
a
to do it.
Not me. This is a bird thing. I'm not the bird man. That's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. They speak a different language. They're a different size. They look different. They live in a different island. They're not in genetic contact with each other. This is classic speciation, and it's just a question of how different they have to be before we actually agree they're a species.
What is the species in here?
And I think it's pretty obvious. Somebody once took a pet Grand Cayman parrot to the brack and it got out. And I was over on the brack studying the brack parrots with a chap called Jim Wiley, who worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and he's one of the great parrot men of the centuries. And we heard a Grand Cayman parrot calling on the brack. How do you tell the difference? You say, it's blindingly obvious. It really sounds different. It's like, what was that? Why is a Grand Cayman parrot
Doesn't
here?
sound right, yeah.
And it turned out it had bonded with a Cayman brack parrot and they were trying to nest. It didn't work. It failed. They couldn't do it.
That tells you something right there.
It tells you something, doesn't it? Yeah.
All right, so you were talking about getting the program off the ground, and that your name was on the list of who was going to be responsible for most of it.
Yeah, and I suppose I just thought, okay, I should just do it. I should try and make this work. And once I made that commitment, the help was there. The support and enthusiasm and interest from here, but also globally, was just like mind-blowing. And it kind of makes you think, okay, this is actually going to be possible, you know. We had volunteers come here from all over the place, building cages so that we could scale up the captive facility. We had donations, we had companies come and actually for free and build extra pens for us, like just like that. We had the prison service up here preparing land for this stuff.
Did I read you were incubating eggs in your office too?
Yeah, where else was there to do it? So I had them at home. I had the incubators at home and we were hatching these little baby iguanas and letting them into cages initially back at the MRCU, and I was still working for government back then, but more subsequently here at the park.
What's the MRCU?
The Mosquito Research and Control Unit.
Oh, okay. You talked them into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were doing most of the environmental stuff then because there was no Department of Environment, there was no National Trust,
sure.
And that's where the biologists were.
It's a small island, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you then here at the Botanic Park, this became the captive breeding facility, right?
So we set up the breeding facility here at the park. We should actually go there.
Okay.
And you can see what that's all about. So we rear them until they're too big for snakes and getting a bit too big for cats, and then we let them loose in protected areas. So the first releases we did hit were completely experimental in the Salina, and that was just three animals, and we radio tracked them for months. And that's when we learned the really good news, which is that these animals have the instinctive knowledge to be able to behave like iguanas. They don't need parental education.
So even though they were captive raised.
So they were captive raised, you put them out in the wild, they figure out what to eat, they figure out how to defend territories, they figure out where to sleep, they figure out how to navigate across landscapes. And that was the other mind-boggling thing. One of these animals decided to take a walk, right? We've got a transmitter on it so we can follow it. This animal, this is just like the small one that we saw there, not much bigger than that, decides to go for a walk, and it walks for 2 miles straight north until it's almost out on the coast. And stops and hangs around there for a while. And then it goes westwards for another mile and hangs out there for a while. And then it takes a direct straight line beeline exactly to where it started. This is a small animal. The rock is going up and down and up and down. There are trees. They've got no view. They've got no landmarks they can orient to. How are they navigating? I have no answer to that question.
You haven't figured it out yet.
I mean, we can speculate, but we don't know how they do this, but they can navigate. with the kind of precision that we rely on electronics to do.
Okay.
It's impressive.
Now the Botanic Park here, I believe you've already mentioned, but it's not fenced, right? So the iguanas could come and go.
And they do.
But how is the habitat surrounding the park? I know we're on a fairly undeveloped part of the island compared to other parts, but there's still a lot of houses. Oh, snake!
So this is Alsophis, well, it's actually now Cubophis, Cantharigerus. It's our native racer snake. It's a day-active snake. These are the only natural predators of the iguanas, really, that of any significance. They hunt baby iguanas. Really? So if we have a cage with a lot of baby iguanas in it, these things will turn up out of the woodwork. So they can smell them, they know they're there. They're rear fang toxins, so they can't hurt people, but they get the iguanas right in the back of the mouth and envenomate them. And once they've been bitten like that, they're toast.
We just did an episode on timber rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
And we talked about the different dentition.
Yeah.
And I remember the rear facing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they look similar to the black racer we have in the States.
Yeah. Habitat-wise, there's
some folks trying to take pictures of them. Someone just tried to touch it. Should not touch it.
No, why?
He was just trying to get some sun, right?
Yeah. So they have an evolutionary history with the baby blue iguanas. So a baby blue iguana knows that snake is a threat. Baby blue iguanas spend a lot of time up in the trees. When it's time to move, they typically come down in the middle of the day, they scamper across the thing, they take a poop and they go up another tree. When they're on the ground, they're snake vulnerable and they're like nervous and
high alert.
But a snake could be hiding in this wall, ready to pounce. And the way a snake will catch an iguana is that like instantaneous lunge. And so for an iguana to escape that, they have to have lightning reflexes, and they have to be able to jump away from the snake faster than the snake's moving to them. So they have highly developed hind legs, and they're really, really good at jumping. They launch themselves into the air just fast enough that the snake doesn't get them, and then they scamper up the tree. And the snake sees it going up the tree and starts to climb the tree to chase it. And up the tree they go. The hatchling goes out on a branch, the snake comes after it on the branch, goes right the way out to the tip, and then the iguana just lets go, falls to the ground, completely unharmed, right, because it's a little animal. And the snake has to wind all its way back down the tree.
All the way. And by that time, the baby iguana's gone.
Gone. So they know how to deal with this. Sometimes they get caught, but it's not very often. What they don't know is some of the predators that we brought with them are dangerous. They don't know that cars are dangerous. They've got no evolutionary exposure to large metal objects travelling at 40, 50 miles an hour. They don't know what that is. They don't know how to respond to it, and they get squashed on the roads. The iguana, one of the iguanas we released in the Salina Reserve, walked out into a backyard, and literally there was a dog in a pen, and the iguana went through because it was interested in the dog food, went into the pen, looked at the iguana, looked at the dog, and the dog bit its head off. You know, it's like they don't know. Hi there. They have no idea that these animals are dangerous, and the experience that they need to learn that they're dangerous is usually fatal.
Right.
And it's the same thing with cats. You know, a baby blue iguana is completely naive to the fact that a feral cat that might be walking past wants to eat them. They don't know. They have no evolutionary knowledge of mammalian predators of any kind. And so they're sitting ducks. And the feral cats, unfortunately, are mopping up the vast majority of young iguanas that hatch in these areas because they're ubiquitous.
So if they wander outside of the park, is their chance of survival much smaller?
It is, because here in the park there's a long history of trying to control the feral cat population, but it is a bit like it's an endless task. As long as there's no cat-proof fence at any rate, trapping cats here is something that just has to go on and on and on and on. It's paid off in the sense that we have like reproduction here. We have young iguanas growing up to reproductive age. We've got multiple generations of iguanas now that have bred and lived in the Botanic Park.
So you know your trapping efforts are
So we know that's working. But out in the Salina Reserve and Collier's Reserve, where we've got hundreds of iguanas released, we still see the same animals we let go.
Oh, that's great.
They're like big animals now, and it's like, wow, look at you, well done. But there's no babies.
Because of the predators?
Because of the predators, and we're pretty clear now because we put wildlife cameras out to try and figure out what's going on. We do foot surveys. We've been doing foot surveys every 3 years out there, and we've been seeing evidence that they're nesting and the hatchlings are emerging. But we're not seeing what we call recruitment.
Right.
We're not seeing the young grow up to an age where they can reproduce and produce their own babies. It's just not happening out there. So we needed to know why, and we put grids of wildlife cameras out there, and we're analysing the images and whatnot. We're realising there are more cats out there than there are blue iguanas.
So you need to continue what you're doing here with the captive breeding.
Well, here's the conundrum. Does this make sense that we're breeding animals and putting them out so they can be eaten by cats?
True.
Is that conservation, or is that, what is that? I'm not sure.
Husbandry.
Yeah. So my feeling about this very, very strongly is we need to figure out how to manage the natural environment out there so that the iguanas can re-establish natural populations, that we don't need to be keeping a captive breeding program and all this stuff, because captive breeding should be a last-ditch frantic effort, right?
And it was.
And it was. But there should be a time when you don't need to do that anymore.
So
And that would be the way. People think we've succeeded. We've got 1,000 iguanas out in the wild, and hooray, hooray, job done. It isn't done. All the problems that drove this in the first place are still out there. We still have habitat destruction. We still have dogs running around the place. We still have feral cats in places they shouldn't be.
You've reduced it from critically endangered to endangered.
Yeah,
right.
And they can go straight back to critically endangered if we don't keep paying attention.
And they've changed the name of the program now, right? Because it was the Blue Iguana Recovery Program, and now it's just Blue Iguana Conservation. Do I have that right?
Yeah. What's in a name? Big burp.
Well, because to my mind, it's not so much about recovery now as it is getting to the point where you said, where there could be breeding and successfully having recruitment of young in natural habitats.
Yeah, and if that's the interpretation, then I approve.
So because now I read they're in phase 2 of the program, right?
These are all human constructs. Phase 1, phase 2, this, that, and the other. What we can say is we've reached the goal that we set in the original strategic plan. We've released over 1,000 blue iguanas into the protected areas. I mean, that is so good to be able to say.
It's a huge milestone.
It's a huge milestone.
Did you allow yourself to feel good about that?
Heck yeah.
Okay, good.
I was even given the privilege of letting the 1,000th iguana loose. I'd moved on from managing the program at that point in time, but I was invited to do that, and it was a magical moment.
Sure.
We hiked all the way into Colliers with this little iguana, so you're number 1,000. Have a good life.
But like you said, a lot of people are like, job done, and you're like, no.
Yeah, it matters how we present this, because if you're trying to raise money to do things, it matters if it's critically endangered or just endangered. People prioritise funding critically endangered. So now we've made some progress, it's harder to raise money.
That's so frustrating.
And it's probably not a bad thing, because there's a lot of money here in the Cayman Islands, and there is money set aside for conservation. There are all sorts of ways that we can resource what needs to be done. But interestingly, some of the habitat management stuff needs technology that is only just beginning to emerge. It's surprisingly recent that we've been able to use wildlife cameras in a quantitative way to estimate population densities. That sounds like a baseline obvious thing to do, right? But 10 years ago there was even the theory that underpinned that didn't exist, and the technology has got so much better in the last decade as well. So things are possible now that weren't possible back then. There's a lot of movement now towards much better ways of tracking animals, because it used to be you stuck a radio transmitter on the back of the animal, you held an antenna and a box, and you followed the animal, right? Nowadays you
sit at home at your computer, right?
Well, it's not that good, but you can let the animal wander around gathering GPS coordinates for a period of time before you go back and download it. And there are better ways of doing this now, and it's getting better all the time. But what we're stuck with is how to sustainably manage feral cats in unfenced wild areas where the blue iguanas are living. If we can do that, then we don't need to fence. If we don't need to fence, then the whole thing becomes much more sustainable financially.
Right.
But the traditional way to remove a feral cat is to put a cage trap out there and bait it and hope the cat goes in the trap. That's a very hard thing to get a cat to do. And then take it to a vet and humanely euthanize it, because they're completely feral. They can't be. There's no pet market to take those animals, unfortunately. What we've been doing with the Department of Environment recently is we've been actually trying to do that on a large scale in Little Cayman, because the rock iguanas on Little Cayman were suffering from exactly the same problem. Because we were surveying them year after year, every 3 years. And what we were seeing the age structure go from a situation that was healthy, when you've got a lot of young ones, slightly fewer middle-aged ones, and the fewest is the adults, to a situation where there were almost no young, and everything was adult and getting older and older and older and older. And again, all the indications were this was from predation from feral cats. So we have now removed somewhere around 87% of the feral cats on Little Cayman.
Congratulations, wow.
It's been a massive undertaking, and we're looking at age structure now that suddenly is starting to bulge at the bottom again.
Beautiful.
So it's like proving the point. If we can do this, we can save these animals, and if we can save the iguanas that way, we're also saving the forest birds, we're saving the curly-tailed lizards, we're saving the snakes.
Everything the cats eat.
Everything you can't see out there is going to benefit. So it's game-changing if we can actually manage this. But the human resource cost
Huge.
is bonkers. And if we don't keep on at this and move it towards an eradication or at least sustainable control, it'll just go straight back to where it was before. So how do we get past this? And most of the development is happening in New Zealand and Australia at the moment, because there's a lot of money going into this there. And some of the smarter minds are looking at better ways of trapping. They're looking at AI-enabled traps that can look at what animal is in front of them, decide what it is, and decide whether or not to be active or not. So you get situations, because we can't bait a trap and leave it out during the day. We'll just catch iguanas. So we have to bait them at dusk and close them at dawn. And just about any kind of trap that we're using for a cat is that way, because otherwise we're going to trap iguanas.
That is hugely intensive. Well,
yeah, it's crazy. But it's worth the effort, because it really, really, really makes that difference. It's socially controversial.
Prickly.
It's very prickly. And we have to face that, and we have to be honest with people. At the end of the day, here are these cats. They're causing massive impacts on the natural environment. We need them out of there. If you're not prepared or able to take them, then what do you want us to do with them? Let's be humane about it. Let's be responsible about it.
We've created this problem.
We've created this problem.
As a
species. Have to solve it. Right. So yeah, I'm hoping.
So that's your next big hurdle. Or
I'm hoping in the next 5-10 years that technologies for humanely and sustainably controlling feral cats without that level of human input will come on the market and be viable. I really hope we can get that.
Well, I hope so too, because maybe then we can use it in other places where cats are issues, not just for iguanas, but for songbirds and lots of other wildlife.
Yeah. It's one of the nicest things about Little Cayman is everybody who's living there saying, I have never seen so many birds. I've never seen so many curly-tailed lizards. This has changed. It's better.
It has an impact.
Thank you.
All right. So you mentioned you wanted to look at the cages. Is that something we want to look at or have on Mike?
At this point, Fred and I headed over to the captive breeding area, a fenced enclosure larger than a football field. And inside were many pens surrounded by low walls, most of which contained iguanas of various ages.
All right. The fencing here is to keep green iguanas out of the captive facility. So green iguanas arrived here in the 80s, and they exploded into the ecosystem here in a way that just blew our minds away. At its worst case, by 2018, there were about 1.3 million green iguanas on this island. and they were defoliating whole landscapes, and they were being squashed on the roads, and they were defecating in people's swimming pools and clambering all over their houses. It was just like awful. The irony is, when I transitioned from saving the blue iguana, I ended up designing the program and launching the program that the government has now spent almost $10 million in reducing the green iguana population back down to a manageable level. But one of the things that we found is that these green iguanas harbour a helicobacter in their saliva, which is a new helicobacter to science. It was unknown until this cropped up. And Wildlife Conservation Society and some of the people that work with them figured it all out for us. When that helicobacter gets into a blue iguana, it is lethal. The iguanas have no history of exposure to that virus, to that bacterium at all, and they get massive septicemia, and if they're not treated within about 48 hours of infection, they die.
As if they didn't have enough stacked against them, right?
They didn't. No, I mean it was horrible. This whole thing blew up literally the year after I set myself apart from the Blue Iguana program and decided to go back to protected areas and everything.
Okay.
And it's like I left and the ship hit the fan. It's like, oh no. But anyway, the situation seems to have stabilised as we've controlled the green iguana population somewhat, but you'll see them, they're present in the park, and we need to stop them getting in here. So any iguana that tries to climb over here is going to hit those rolling things there and won't be able to get in.
So folks, we're walking by a fence that's what, about 7 feet tall?
I think it's 8.
8 feet tall? And there's a tube, sections of tube along the top that are the rolling things that Fred was just referring to. And then inside are all the pens.
And this is bigger now than it was in my day. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and better.
So now we're entering through a fenced door. So we have pens that have walls around them about 4 or 5 feet high.
So what we're doing here is we're trying to give these animals enough space that they feel at least some semblance of a wild life. It works all right for the smaller animals, but the big adult males don't thrive in captivity. Long term they don't thrive because they're not getting the kind of stimulation and challenge that they live in the wild when they're wandering over miles and miles of territory, trying to dominate female territories, trying to chase competitors away. They lead these complicated and dynamic social lives, and they're really, really, really physically active.
Hard to do in a pen.
But we're putting in a pen with a female because we want that genetic pairing to keep the genetic diversity going the way we want it to be, representing all of these different lines. Because we needed to try and capture as much genetic variation as we could, and it's really hard when you're starting out with a tiny population. The best thing is if you can get 20 unrelated founders from the wild, and then you're talking about 85% of the genetic variation of the whole population.
And were you able to do that?
We were. It took a while, but we got there. What we can't prove is that all of these founders are completely unrelated. Right. It's hard to know that for sure. But we got over 20 founders, and we bred from them.
And that was the stud book you talked about, right?
That's the luck.
It's a great name.
Yeah.
So you said you keep them here until they're about 2 years old?
The babies, yes.
Okay.
But now we've started experimenting a bit, and it's quite interesting what we've discovered relatively recently. A chap called Luke Harding, who was running this program until recently, figured this out. That if you rear the hatchlings together for the first 5 months or so, just until they start competing with each other and you get differential growth rates, and then let them go, they have a remarkably high survival rate. And we've watched this, and it seems that the snakes are deterred even at that age. It may be that the snakes are only a serious predator for the first few months of life, or else they're just really good at not getting eaten. We don't know what the story is, but the survival rate of those young ones here in Botanic Park has been spectacular.
You got a rough house with their siblings first, and then
yeah. So I don't know. It might actually be that we don't need to keep them for as long as we thought we did.
Wow. And what's the home range of a blue iguana? I mean, male and female, it's got to be different.
The females tend to space themselves about 100 yards apart from each other.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
A bit more when they're really, really big, but I mean, in good habitat, they can go one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here. So it's a football pitch, right? Which is quite a distance.
That's soccer for our American listeners.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah, so, but then the males do a whole different thing, because their objective is to try and monopolize as many different female territories as they can.
Gotcha.
And monopolize is an aspiration rather than anything they ever achieve.
Right.
So they're constantly patrolling, typically over a mile, 2 miles of territory.
So male's territory is much larger.
Much larger in the breeding season. Out of the breeding season, they stop doing all of that. But in the breeding season, they are motors. They're just going across the landscape, and they know where they're going. They navigate. I was telling you about navigation. They know, okay, I'm going there now because I haven't been there in a while. Now I'll go here, and I'll come here, and I'll go there, and I'll go there, and I'll go there. And they're just always on the move. And they encounter another male, they'll be chasing them miles off into the landscape, and then coming back to check on this one and this one. Meanwhile, all the sneaker males are coming in and trying to get a piece of action when the other guys are out. It's chaos.
Which explains why they have such a hard time in these little pens.
Yeah, it's boring. But how else can we control the genetics? And yeah, it's what we have to do.
And I think this is a perfect place to stop if we could come over here, because folks, we just happen to be standing by a plaque that has Fred's name on it,
Oh, Lordy.
in recognition of project founder. So I know when we tried to record a little earlier, we talked a little bit about how you were talking about how so many people were involved in this whole project over the decades.
Yeah. It's one thing I push back against when people said I did this single-handed. That's nonsense. There's no way anybody does something like this single-handed, and I certainly didn't. I may have been the cheerleader, I may be the person who's been on record most talking about it, but we had a staff of volunteers and some paid people involved in this. We had help from volunteers from all over the world. We had technical support from institutions. When I wrote that book and I had to start writing acknowledgements in the back, it was like it goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages and pages. And I mean, these aren't people who just like dipped in and helped for a day or two. These are serious assistant supporting roles that made all this actually happen. We had zoos contribute people, money. We had all this technical help with genetics and stud book management. We had a whole thing with Team Blue volunteers. People would come here from wherever they were for a couple of weeks, sometimes for 3 weeks, sometimes even for a month. We'd have somewhere they could sleep. They paid their own way down here, they paid their own food, and they just worked for us for free.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So if people, listeners want to support the work here, if they want to get involved, can they just go to the website? Is that the best way to do it?
Well, for sure, yeah. I mean, right now the program is mainstreamed with the National Trust. The Department of Environment is still involved in an advisory and sort of oversight fashion. But the National Trust for the Cayman Islands, is the first place to reach out to.
We can tell people where to go in our episode notes, how to find that information.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Fred, I want to thank you so much on behalf of Steve and Daniel, my co-hosts, all our listeners. I want to say thank you for being so patient as I struggle with the technology here, but just thank you for being willing to give us a tour, give us your time. It means the world to me. And personally, as someone who has spent my entire adult life learning about the environment, and especially the importance of land preservation in terms of what that does for biodiversity, thank you for your work for this species and all the species here on Grand Cayman. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm always happy to talk about it, and I will work on this stuff until the day I die, I expect.
Right. Glad to hear it. All right, folks, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed that glimpse into the story of the Grand Cayman Blue Iguana and how it was brought back from the brink. And once again, we'd like to thank Fred for his expertise, for his time, and for his tolerance of me on that afternoon. And with that, it is time for our wrap-up. First and foremost, we'd like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. We also like to give a special shout-out each month to our top patrons, so stick around for the end of the episode, where we would normally have my daughter Violet share that list, but as you can probably hear in my voice, the flu is ripping through my house right now, and Violet's not feeling so hot, so I'll be reading the list this time around. But if you'd like to be part of the Field Guides and read our patron list in a future episode, email us at thefieldguides@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron of our show at patreon.com. Because of support from our listeners, we've been able to keep the show free and make cooler episodes like this one. You can also make a one-time donation through PayPal on our website. A big thank you to Tracy T. for their extremely generous donation in December. And don't forget that we have Field Guides merch available through our website store at thefieldguidespodcast.com. Remember, if you can't financially support the podcast, you can help us out by sharing with friends and family and by subscribing and leaving us a review wherever you get your podcast. It helps spread the word and allows us to reach a wider audience. And don't forget, folks, that our YouTube channel is up and running. All our episodes are on there, so if that's how you listen to your podcast, you can listen to the Field Guides that way now, too. Come enjoy our sporadic posts on Facebook and Instagram, and you can always email us ideas for episode topics, criticisms, or your stories of personal encounters with conservationists named Fred to thefieldguides@gmail.com. Remember, parents, get those kids outside, let them get muddy, let them get dirty, let them flip over rocks and logs. And if you don't have any children, please make some time to get yourself outside. And on behalf of Steve and Daniel, we'll see you next time. And if you're still here, that means you've stuck around to hear this month's top patrons. So here we go. Eric, Alyssa, Adam, Mary, Sung, Dr. Judy, Kimberly B., Peter R., Callie, Rich K., the Hebranks, Orange Julian, Daniel M., Diane, we named the dog Indy, Hot Dog Cold Weather, Dwayne H., Jennifer D., Jonathan A., Elizabeth P., Picasso 3, John R., Evan, Mark T., Cecilia, Julie B., Dennis, Leslie H., Chris N., Jeff S., Colin G., Brant, Jonathan K., Matt E., Pants in My Plants, Sean M., Ryan R., Sophie S., Connor H., Measure and Principle, Fragaria papilioidea, Outside Chronicles, Andrew C., Quixote, Max D., Melissa Marie in Dusty, Arizona, Kelly S., Sarah S., Helen A., Judy F., Ben C., Jane H., Doodledude82, Gallon Mac, Kazzies, Esther C., John W., Mark V., Bethany H., Rob M., and Hannah M. As always, folks, Daniel, Stephen, and I, we appreciate your support so much. And we'll also give you a little preview since you stuck around this long. In just a few days, we are heading down to Florida to record our next episode. This one's going to be on the American crocodile, and it is because of your support that that trip and that episode will be possible. And thank you so much for making 2024 a great year for the Field Guides.